The second scripture lesson comes from the epistles from 2 Peter, the second letter of Peter, chapter 3, verse 13. The apostle says, "But in accordance with his promise, we wait for new heavens and a new earth, where righteousness is at home." The word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Please pray with me. Lord, may the words of my mouth and the meditations of our hearts be acceptable in thy sight, O God, our rock and our redeemer. Amen. The 4th of July kind of came in the middle of the week this year. Came on a Thursday, which makes for a long weekend, right? If you plan strategically for it, it does. But it's a problem for people who have to design worship services, because I know that many of you love the Sunday closest to the 4th of July when we sing "My Country 'Tis of Thee" and "America the Beautiful," and we read from Galatians, "For freedom Christ has set us free," and Nancy plays "My eyes have seen the glory" for the offertory. I love it too. But do you do that on the Sunday before the 4th or the Sunday after the 4th? I know the Sunday after the 4th, the 7th, is a day closer, but as far as I'm concerned, after July the 5th, it's over. And I have to make that decision back like in January. So I chose the Sunday before this year. And if you came today hoping that it was a Sunday after, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. But I'm glad you're here. And we did have the litany for the nation and the other elements that are part of the service that we've shared in. There's a lot of conversation if you read journals about worship and the conversations of worship planners. If you spend a week prior at the Worship and Music Conference in Montreat, as I did, there's a lot of conversation about what's appropriate with respect to worship on Sunday close to the 4th of July. And there certainly is a significant voice of folks who argue that we shouldn't in some way lift it up, that it's a civil holiday, and that they even suggest it's idolatrous to do so. And remember, I'm the one who was touting around his copy of the 10 Commandments, right? The hang on the wall. So it has that commandment at the beginning that says, "You shall only worship the Lord your God and nothing else. And you can't create idols, even a national idol." But I continue to have a Sunday that lifts it up. Obviously, as the one who designed that service last Sunday, I think there's an appropriate place for gratitude for the gifts of a country as a part of our walk in faith, and prayers for its future, and connecting citizenship with faith. Christians can love their country, and I believe Christians are called into being active citizens, constructive, participating, even leading in the systems of government and the work of government. This week I read a theologian named Alberto Rojas. He's a professor, Bob, at Western Theological Seminary in Holland, Michigan. I know that's a good Reformed school. And in a wonderful essay, he talks about his own journey. He's the child of immigrants. His parents immigrated from Peru. And while he was still a baby, they made the long journey, from Peru to Chicago, outside of Chicago where they landed. That's a long journey, especially if you're traveling on foot and rail car along the way. And they came quite a while back intentionally. You have to make a decision to come to do that. You have to really want to come. They came and set up their new residence south of Chicago. Alberto Rojas, Professor Rojas, talks about, as he was growing up, the tension that he felt in his family with his parents, who had obviously chosen to be there outside of Chicago, chose to travel there, to live there, and most importantly for them, to work there, to make income, a part of which they always sent back to their home, to their extended families and siblings there in Peru. So that was a tension with their desire to be there and also they're always in the home remembering the country they had come from and loving it as well. He talks about how they did that in nurturing the memory at home. As a boy, Professor Rojas says, he was encouraged to speak the native tongue and to do so even with a Peruvian accent. That was something they intentionally continued in their family system. And they served at times special Peruvian meals, particularly at holidays, and certain Peruvian customs with their extended family there in that community and rituals, but most importantly, memories, an active nurturing of memories from the home where they had come, even as they live now in their new home. But, he reported, as a boy growing up, he grew further and further apart from that. He wasn't interested in being Peruvian. He wanted to be an American. And as a teenager, he didn't want to be the boy who was different. He wanted to fully assimilate in with all of the other teenagers in high school and middle school that he was a part of. He was teased for speaking with something of an accent, and he worked at speaking English, and he didn't want to be different than the others. And by the time he reports he went off to college, he was thoroughly assimilated into his American identity with little appreciation for his parents' connection still with their native Peru. And then he did what a lot of people have to do. He came home from college for the summer and had to get a job. And the job that he got was a laboring job working in a factory, and he got the job through the network of connection with his extended Peruvian family system, because they had a particular factory where they had a lot of people working there, and so they were able to get him as a college student home for the summer, a job there. Anybody else do this? Anybody else come home from the summer and work at a job like that? You know this narrative, don't you? I spent 2 summers coming home from college and working as a laborer for Atlas Van Lines. I know that drill. We move furniture there. I will tell you at this point, I would say coming home and working at a laboring job for the summer is worth a full college credit. It is. And if I had some sway over college curriculums, I might try and require it for all college students, all right? I remember going to work at Atlas Van Lines that first summer in the first week, and they had a nickname for me. You know what they called me? They called me College Boy. And while I think at the beginning they didn't necessarily mean it with affection, I'm pretty sure by the time we got to the end, they did mean it with affection. And it was an education. The fellowship of gathering on the warehouse dock there, talking with them early in the day as we waited for a driver, the guys who drive the big semis to come in, and they would pick us up at the warehouse dock, and we would go out to them. We pretty much were moving a house a day. You'd go in, pick up your driver, and you'd pack up that house and move it someplace, trying to beat the darkness before it fell. I learned something about their culture and a little bit probably more than I should have about their vocabulary, and I learned about sweating and hard work and the character, the goodness of their character, at least as I experienced it there, and something about the art. You know, there's a real art to backing up a semi-truck and getting it into the toughest places, and there's an art to driving it with furniture and without furniture. When you pull up to a big house and you're going to load the whole semi, they typically have these doors in the middle of the truck. And you open both those doors and they put ramps up. So you can carry from the middle of the truck up the ramp and load it up with some ventilation coming in that way. I remember one house I was loading up with a man who worked his career there, a guy named Luther. And we were carrying in a china cupboard. They can be kind of fragile, had a lot of glass in the front of it. And Luther was at the top because he was more experienced, and I was at the bottom. And that meant that he had to walk backwards. We went up that ramp, all right, with me not being able to see over the china cupboard and him at the back. And I walked him, in my lack of attention, my whistling as I worked, I walked him up that semi, through it, and right out the other side without stopping. As he was going down the alternate ramp on the other side, he was hollering out, "College boy! College boy!" If there hadn't been a ramp on the other side, I would have killed him. And I would have shattered that glass cupboard too, as well. Did you see what I was doing there? I was remembering with affection and appreciation an experience of home. I wasn't saying everything about loading furniture was good. I wasn't simply baptizing moving furniture as the kingdom of God on earth. But I was affirming the gifts that were authentically and deeply present in that time and place and fellowship. You can do both, you know. Professor Roja reported that he came home from college that summer to a job in a factory where there was a core fellowship of Peruvian immigrants, and that was really the first time in his adult life that he suddenly found himself appreciating some of the values of his parents' heritage. As he heard it almost from another perspective from those people, he said, I saw it immediately, he said, when we sat down for lunch together at the wooden table, and people broke open their lunch boxes that they brought their sandwiches in. The first thing they did, he said, was to start by offering some of what they had to one another. And he said, I reckon we weren't doing that at college, he said, when we sat down to eat. We weren't starting by offering some of what we had. I recognized that as home when they did that. I saw it as a value that I appreciated and really grew to love amongst them. Jesus goes back to Nazareth, his hometown. That's the word in Greek, his hometown. Why? Why does Jesus go back to his hometown? Well, what do you love about the place you still call home? Jesus loved home. I think the Bible teaches us that. He loved the home of Galilee. I think he loved the water and the land. His brothers and his sisters, it's in this text. His family was still there in Nazareth, in particular, plural, with both of them, sisters and brothers. The brothers are named. He spoke the language, the local language, and he got to Jerusalem and he didn't change it. He still spoke the local language of the Galilean accent of that place. The stories he told were stories out of that culture, about their agriculture, about their life together. I think Jesus loved his home. And Nazareth rejects him with innuendos and kind of muttering at first. But in some of the other Gospels, it grows even to violence, not in Mark's account. Why is that? Verse 2, chapter 6, on the Sabbath, Jesus began to teach in the synagogue. They invited him to teach in the synagogue there in Nazareth when he came back home. He began to teach in the synagogue, and many who heard him were astounded. They said, "Where did this man get all this? What is this wisdom that has been given to him? What deeds of power are being done by his hands? Is not this the carpenter, the son of Mary and brother of James and Joseph and Judas and Simon? Are not his sisters here with us?" And they took offense at him. End of text. Was it jealousy? Do you think that they thought Jesus had gotten the big head? Being the Son of God and all now. Did it look like arrogance to them? Do you think that after that experience, Jesus stopped loving home? No, I don't either. I think Jesus was passionate about Galilee, about the friendships that he had there. The scriptures teach us he loved his home, and after his resurrection, he goes back to Galilee to meet them there again. I think this story teaches us in part, I think it teaches us that even in Nazareth, everything may not be perfect about home. Indeed, home may be significantly flawed, and yet you can still love it, even passionately. I'm aware of some of our varied histories here. We all have our own journeys to how we came here this morning, different family stories. and I'm aware of some of your journeys. I tend to romanticize home, but I know home can be a place of real woundedness and even trauma. We do not need to be in denial about the faults or even imperfections of home, nor do we need to always feel a fierce hierarchy of superiority over our home versus any other home to be faithful Christians. We do not need to pretend that everything at home is or was always good in order to love it. And we cannot expect that everyone at home is going to support us for doing the right thing. Some people are convinced the Sunday after the 4th of July is the one to have that emphasis. Everybody at home will not always support you for doing what you think is the right thing. But today's story is so important that all 4 of the Gospels remember it. There's something very profound here. Jesus loved home in Galilee, and he called it home, and he visited there, and he returned there ultimately. This story, though, teaches us, in fact, it promises us that our ultimate home is actually with God and God's new creation. And in this life, we are not there yet. In this place, we are not there yet. Our earthly home may be a foretaste of the joyous life to come, where we will be welcomed and all God's love will be welcomed. We may see it in our home, this place, breaking in at times. Jesus said, wherever 2 or 3 of you are gathered, there I am also. As 2 Peter puts it, in accordance with the promise, we wait. We wait for a new heaven and a new earth. And there, righteousness is going to be at home. Justice and peace will come together there. That's the definition of righteousness, I think. We live into that promise now. We live into that promise that 2 Peter makes. We live into it by living with those values and those actions that are home-like. That citizenship that witnesses to God's best values. When we live into that kind of citizenship, we are practicing our citizenship as God's family. Even as citizens in the here and now, we are practicing our citizenship for the life to come. God creates home. We practice living at home. In the 14th chapter of John's Gospel, Jesus promises, those who love me and keep my word, my Father will love them, and we, he uses the plural, we will come to them and we will make our home with them, which is to say, God makes home. I'm thinking about Ingrid Martin this week. I doubt any of you knew Ingrid Martin. She died on July the 2nd. She's been a powerful blessing in this church. She's the mother of Virginia Martin Lone, who's married to Mel Lone in our congregation. And they're the parents of Sasha Lone, who's married to Gary Weissman. They were here at 8:30 with their little boy, and also Anjali Davis, who with her husband Charles is here in church with their children. So there's like 3 generations of her family here. Ingrid was born in 1929 in Germany, all right? What do you think was like being a girl born in Germany in 1929, all right? It's 1939 when you're 10, and it's 1949 when you're 20. Right? But she did it, and she cared for her own mother and her grandmother there during those difficult years of the 40s and mid-40s. She met an American GI, a guy named Robert Martin, who was sent there to serve, and they ended up getting married. They came to the United States and lived in Spokane, Washington for a while, and then he convinced her to go back to Tennessee, to their home, his family home, in a little town there in Tennessee, where she lived out the rest of her life, raising her daughter, who came here with her husband and raised her family here, now blessing us. They're going to have a service in October when they have kind of a homecoming. And they all go back to that little town in Tennessee to remember and give thanks for her life, Virginia and her daughters. and Ingrid's son. Where was home for Ingrid Martin? Was it in Germany? Was it that brief stop in Spokane? Even in a lovely house in Tennessee? Ingrid is at home with God. God makes home. God brings it to completion in God's new creation. God receives Ingrid into her home in God. God creates home. We practice living as citizens in God's home. And this truth in our life, that we are practicing for the home that God is creating, it generates in our lives purpose and specific behaviors and also hope. Do you know there's a phrase for this practice of living like we are already at home in the home God has created? There's a phrase for it. It's called living by faith. We live by faith. When we live as people seeking God's homeland, we are living by faith. At the end of the service, we'll do a unison reading from Hebrews where they talk about it explicitly, the author does. The things we love best about this place is beauty, it's peace, it's fellowship, it's justice, it's possibilities. I tell you, the things that we love best, these are elements that resonate within us of a better homeland. What the apostle calls a better homeland being created by God. That's why we love them, because they resonate within us of something of what God is calling us and creating us toward. You keep the faith. Keep the faith. Nurture hope. It takes active nurturing. Keep practicing. God will get you home. God will lead us home.